Well, hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be going over Universal Print and how that can be useful in a cloud and Intune managed environment. I'm joined today with Philip Demaray. He's a Senior Support Escalation Engineer for the Windows Engineering team under Universal Print. And my name is Tyler Duncan. I am an Educational Technical Support Specialist for the Top 2K program. So we do have a lot of content to cover today. So there's 4 separate agenda slides. So I'm going to do my best to kind of just do a very high level overview. And then we're going to get into the very, very nitty gritty about like Universal Print, how it's utilized in different kind of areas that you'll need to understand when thinking about like your Intune deployments. So the first thing that we're going to cover are partner integrations, who we work closely with, have the best integrations with, and kind of the ease of use. What licenses are required for this type of installation, whether it's a subscription-based or if you're going to purchase it a la carte. We're going to then move into an overview of Universal Print and how it can be used in your organization today. Then we're going to talk about printing previously. They were talking on-prem print systems and how they're still utilized today and some of the limitations with cloud printing. From there, we're going to move into native print integration, so the services that we work with the closest and that we don't have as many prerequisites. We'll move into Microsoft Universal Print, which we'll talk about our connector, how that integrates into an on-prem print system or with some of our partners. We'll discuss third-party Universal Print connectors because some of our partners have created their own. We'll also discuss hybrid join printing, when that hybrid join scenarios might still be required, where going fully cloud may not be a fully available option to you just yet. Then from there, we're going to cover different printing management and clients and like how you're going to get it on the machines. So, how to share the printers, access controls, different kind of features such as the printer settings, their locations, the defaults of them, and how this will actually be deployed. So how you'll add them to the system, how users will search for them, how they can view different printers. We'll go over how to do Intune and Microsoft Endpoint Manager deployments. So that way you can deploy it out to your devices, whether they're in a hybrid or a co-managed state. We'll talk about BYOD scenarios. We'll discuss Azure Virtual Desktop and roaming profile support. And from there, we're going to move into our final agenda, which is just discovering some of the more advanced parts of the configuration, some troubleshooting steps, kind of helping you work through kind of like hey, if the print job is sent and we don't understand what's broken, it will kind of break down how to work through those diagnostics. And then we've got additional resources and a nice little survey at the end to kind of help us understand, where we can help you in the future. So the first slide I want to go through is our partner ecosystem. And it's really important to kind of understand that Universal Print is kind of the core feature product that we give our educational institutions access to as part of A3 and A5. And these are the partners that we integrate the closest with today. The biggest ones I typically like to bring up are like HP, your Canons, your Konica Minoltas. Like I typically see those in the education sector quite frequently. And then more recently, I've also seen PaperCut also become kind of a larger kind of partner in this field in the education space. But we integrate with a wide variety of partners. We are going to go over how we integrate with them differently and how some of them might integrate a little bit better or easier in your deployments for the future. And as part of that, we're going to kind of discuss, with that partner ecosystem, some of them offer, printer firmware updates via this system. They offer like third-party connectors and integrators where you don't use the Microsoft Print connector, or you don't have like the native integration and they want you to use their connector. Some of them have pull print solutions where we also refer to that as secure print. Or in some cases, we talk about, I've heard also a lot of educational institutions refer to it as pin code printing. So we'll kind of go over those scenarios as well. Now, the first thing I know a lot of you like to go over, so you have like a fully understanding of, can I even use this and is this available to me? So right now I've got the licensing requirements pulled up. So on the educational side, we include it in A3 or A5 in the M365 educational stack. And what it does is it gives you access to a pool of licenses based on how many faculty licenses that you've purchased. And as you can see down there, it's 5 jobs per month towards the pool capacity based on how many faculty licenses you've purchased. So it's really important to kind of understand that that is included in those base subscriptions that a lot of our customers purchase today. They will also need at least Windows 10 version 21H1 or Windows 11 for a lot of these features to function. Anything sooner than that, there are a lot of kind of cruxes and situations where it may not work the best. And so we really recommend using those versions or newer. Our customers will need to have their Azure Active Directory tenant online, functional, and in use today. They do not have to have a Windows server to do this. However, if they do need to go down the hybrid print scenario, or not the hybrid print scenario, but they have a hybrid, like the Microsoft Print connector on a local print server, they do need to have that access to that printing system, so that way we could help you into the future. Now, there is also standalone pricing. I'm not able to give you any pricing details on what that is MSRP-wise, but you can contact your partner. Now, the pricing that I can go over and the MSRPs that I have today are the universal print, like per user sub-licensing. And you can see on the right-hand side, I've got it broken down by what it costs monthly and what your annual costs are going to be. I know a lot of our schools are on annual commitments, or they need to know, hey, what's it going to cost me yearly? And so I did that breakdown on the right-hand side to make this a lot easier. Now, one thing I do want to bring up that's very important to understand. When these pool licenses are added, the only licenses that are added are based on your faculty licenses. You do not get an additional student use benefit based on the licenses purchased. So to kind of help facilitate or explain this, and I know Phil sometimes is a little bit better at this than I am, but if you have 100 faculty licenses, the total print capacity would be 500, not 5,500 because the additional student subscriptions that you have in your tenant. So it's very important to understand that kind of different level of student use benefits compared to what you're purchasing with your faculty use benefits today. Now, it is also important to note that currently in the systems today, it does not block total print capacity if it is exceeded. Now, that's probably going to change in the future. We're not sure, but we do want to make sure people understand that currently today, that is how the system works. Now, to help supplement this into the future, when you kind of know you're going to be using a lot more print jobs, those volume print subscriptions underneath here, the Universal Print Volume T1 and T2, that's really the bread and butter for a lot of our schools today, because I know a lot of you have been concerned of, man, I print a lot of jobs every month. Well, just so you understand, that's 10K jobs per month, not per year. The $1,800 the yearly cost. And so I know a lot of you are like, man, we've got 10 or 20K, print jobs that my teaching staff are doing every month. So that you're more than likely looking at the T2 for the universal print, like add-on, to be able to compensate for that. Now, moving into this next area, we have a little video that kind of shows you the licenses that are needed and how to activate them in your tenant. Since we only have about an hour and a half to cover this content, I am leaving this video as kind of like a separate piece for us to watch at a later date. But just in case, if you need to understand how to actually turn the licenses on in your tenant, or you haven't today, or if they've been disabled in the past, this is a nice little video snippet that'll show you how to turn that feature on. Now, it is one important thing to note that Universal Print is not available to guest accounts. So if you do have guest accounts that are being added to your tenant and you're licensing them with, say, A5 for faculty, for example, the Universal Print license on those guest accounts would not function as it stands today. So what is Universal Print and how is it useful in your environment today? Well, Universal Print is a modern print solution that organizations can use to manage their print infrastructure through cloud services from Microsoft. So what this means is whether it's an on-prem print system that natively integrates with Microsoft, or whether it's an older on-prem system like Rico that's tied to a Windows print server, Universal Print is meant to bridge that gap, regardless of what system that you're using today. It's a subscription-based service that your organization can use to centralize that print management pane under one portal or one pane of glass. So that way, as you need to push it out to different levels of devices or, different areas of your ecosystems, Universal Print is really meant to try and centralize that and make it easier for you to deploy and manage in your environments today. It is available globally. The only kind of exemptions to that are Russia and China, but as it is today, we know that there is a lot of features in those different ecosystems that are very limited, but everywhere else globally it is available. It really is just meant to try and help you organize all those different print systems today, centralize them in the Azure systems, so that way you've got an easy pane of glass to be able to share, distribute it, and out to different devices, and even user groups at that rate to make it a lot easier to manage the different printing systems that you have today. Now, what are the customer challenges that they usually have to face with this? Well, when you move to the cloud or Intune management, or any other kind of cloud system where you're moving away from group policy, well, published printer servers are very, very difficult to maintain after Print Nightmare. And so a lot of institutions have found it very difficult to try and deal with like on-prem print systems with cloud managed devices. And so that's where Universal Print is supposed to help fill in that gap. The cost of it as well, with 60,000 students, you need to understand like what students are actually printing, because I run into so many educational institutions today that pretty much kind of give me the answer of, well, I don't know what my kids print. They just print, thousands and thousands of print jobs. Well, Universal Print can help you understand what's being printed in your environment, to understand the associated costs with that, and to get that visibility into what's actually going on, so that way you can make educated decisions about your print systems going into the future. Because if your institution or organization has to find areas to cut cost, well, maybe that 400-page Pinterest thing that the students was printing, maybe that's something to start to figure out how to kind of reel some of that stuff in. And thirdly, it's typically complexity. With a lot of the on-prem print systems today and how they work, there's a lot of complexities to get it all set up, get all the integrations working, get authentication and print queues, getting it published. There's a lot of complexity that goes into maintaining all those print infrastructures. And Universal Print is really meant to try and simplify and make a lot of that easier for our customers. It's meant to unblock, and make it a lot easier for people to manage like hybrid print setups. It's really, at the end of the day, for the IT department, it's meant to make your lives a lot easier. Like on my end before this, I would have to figure out weird PowerShell scripts, or I'd have to try and figure out, oh, hey, I got to go into my Rico print system, look at what their logs say, go to the user account, and then have it sit there and show me what they printed for the day. So Microsoft Systems on the IT side, it gives you so much better reporting, and it gives you such a nice feature set to be able to see what is going on in your environment compared to a lot of the previous on-prem systems. And so it's really meant to further your goals of trying to understand, what are we doing today? How much is truly being printed? Is this stuff that probably should be printed? And if not, trying to manage and make sure that you're kind of reining a lot of that in long term. Now, how does this look for users? Well, Universal Print was designed to make that user-friendly experience as easy as possible. So there's no additional learning curve. So the normal print interface that they're used to going through today in the Microsoft systems, like it integrates existingly into that backplane as it is today. So that way your users don't have to learn a whole other portal or interface to go into. They also still have the ability to view, add, and print-only printers that certain users have access to. So with Universal Print, and depending on the partner that you go with, like you'll have access to a lot of those same features that you did on-prem previously, to where users can go and see a printer that might be published, and it could be based on location data, or it could just be based on site code data, and they see those printers and add them themselves. It's a driverless experience. And so it makes it so much easier to manage a lot of that with our users going forward with the Universal Print systems. And the other thing that's really nice for some of our users that are very mobile, that sometimes just need to print while they're out at some of the buildings and have it ready for them when they get to their offices, Universal Print is really great for that. And a great use case scenario that I used to use this for, and Phil knows this. So I had my special educational department that was moved over to Universal Print. And a lot of their staffers were mobile. They had to go between all the different buildings, but they had one centralized building that they had to go back to at the end of the day to finish all their documentation and paperwork for their students that have, special needs and accessibility. And a big boon for them was the ability that no matter what building they were at, they were able to print all the various documents that they had access to at the buildings to their printer in their office back at the main building office. So that way, when they got back to that office, all they had to do was just put their badge up there and it printed off all the jobs. That way it was all nice and easy and ready to go for them once they got into that office. And so it was super nice to be able to have that ability that no matter what building she went to, she was able to still print back to that printer back at the main central office and have access to those print jobs. So it's really, really nice when you're kind of thinking about that. You know, maybe you have students that might be in a different state, or they're doing online learning, but the teacher requires some sort of like hand-in printed document, and the students could send that printer over to the school and not actually have to be on premises. So it's really kind of amazing to kind of think about that prospect for our teachers and our students going into the future. So how does universal print work? Well, if you see this kind of diagram right here, and I'm going to try and do my best to break this down, we've got the universal print service that runs atop Azure Active Directory. So understand from my identity perspective, it's using the UPN, the user principal name. And from there, that's what connects down to your Windows clients. And that could be co-management, that could be Intune and Autopilot, and that service connects to your Universal Print Ready printers, or it connects to Universal Print Connector, depending on what type of avenue that you've gone down. And when all these pieces are put in place, this gives you a centralized management plane to be able to share and publish the different Universal Print printers based on different configuration scenarios based on what kind of avenue that you went down. And so it's just really kind of nice to understand, like, it's a cloud-based service that allows you to tap into your existing on-prem infrastructures as well as newer print systems that you might be purchasing that are just natively accessible to Universal Print. And it gives you one single pane of glass. So for the first, with really nice native reporting. So really, really nice kind of feature set for our educational staffers today. Now, there are different layers of hardware compatibility with this, and we're going to be going deeper into this later in the PowerPoint presentation. But it's really important to understand that different partners and different hardware have different levels of options available to the Universal Print client. And that might depend on whether you have a native, a third party, or you use the Universal Print connector. It really just depends on what your environment looks like today. Now, Universal Print is based on Mopria, and Mopria was originally founded by Canon, HP, Samsung, and Xerox. But what you can think about is there were more or less a group of printing institutions that came apart and said, hey, we have to figure out something after Print Nightmare, because unfortunately, the typical driver model that we had before isn't really an option because hackers have figured out how to use printer driver files to, as a standard user, elevate itself as an admin and wreak all sorts of havoc on different types of systems. And so Canon, HP, Samsung, and Xerox came together and said, hey, how are we going to be able to deal with this type of situation, and what are we going to do? And so they came up with Mopria, and Mopria is an open source kind of service that it's called IPP attributes. And what it means is that the attributes of the printers are published in such a way through this Mopria service that the system knows what the printer is capable of without having to install a driver on the local machine. And so kind of think of it as like a kind of a directory that says, hey, this is this printer, this is what it's capable of, this is where it's located, this is what it can do, here are the trays that it has, the color types, the paper sizes that it can do, its finishing options, and it's got all of this published into this in this Mopria system and a driverless model, so that way it's easy for you to publish and make available to your users without having to worry about the whole Print Nightmare issue. Now, the one downside to this, though, is because obviously this is an open source initiative and people are working towards this and companies are working towards this. Not every partner is as far along in the integrations. And so sometimes with some partners, they might not have full features available that others might. And a good example of this that I can bring up is when I was going through this with my Rico integration, Bill and I had a huge issue with the way that the system with the Ricos and how they were reporting. They had this like architectural diagram tray that was a separate little add-on thing. It was only on one printer in the whole district. And for some reason, it always would say paper tray size mismatch whenever like that printer was printed to in that tray. And so that was the one limitation that I had to make sure that my users understood, that moving over to that method, the universal print methodology, and moving into that system, that would be one feature that wouldn't function. And I ended up finding out that it wasn't a big deal because it was only one person in the entire district, and it was the operations director. And the only time that he used it was to print out architectural design diagrams for the buildings. And I ended up finding out that he really didn't even need that our printing department had also bought a separate architectural diagram printer, and they had all the full printing drivers loaded so that that way they could do very specialized things to the architectural diagrams. So that way we worked with a number of different partners, and they had to have it had to be sized very particular ways on the paper. And so the RICO system didn't have a very native way to do that, but the printing department did. So we ended up moving him over to having him send those print jobs over to the print department. And that use case scenario where they had that tray issue was no longer a problem. And so it's important to kind of understand there might be ways to kind of override maybe some of the system limitations that might be prevalent in some of our partners' product stacks today. So how does it work? So printers are registered with Azure and Universal Print Service up in the cloud. They are then shared to your users, and that could be based on device groups, user groups. It just really depends. The clients connect to Azure's Universal Print Share endpoint, which is up in the cloud. The jobs are then relayed from the machine's local print queue up to Azure. Azure then relays it down to your on-prem print systems and then prints it out. And if it's a native system, it'll print it out directly. If it is a print connector system, it'll send it to the connector, and the connector will constantly kind of ping out and say, hey, are there any jobs available up in Azure? And then it'll pull, and then every 2 to 4 seconds it goes, oh, okay, there's a print job, and it pulls it down from Azure and then prints it out through your print systems. So it's kind of important to understand it's doing more of a pulling motion than it is a waiting type of on its own motion. So from there, everything is done over HTTPS connections. So it's very important to understand, because I've had customers ask about this before. Well, if it's going up to Azure and it's printed, well, don't we have to worry about can't somebody see the file as it's transmitted across the internet? Well, they can see it, but they're not going to be able to read it because it's encrypted via HTTPS transmissions. So from that native security standpoint, that file is unreadable. It's only going to be serviceable by the connector on the other end. If somebody is able to snoop it, they're not going to be able to read that file. Now, what are some universal print benefits? The universal print class driver is inbox. It's native to our environment today. There's no additional print nightmare issues or things that you have to worry about, and the deployment is super simplistic. Everything connects to Azure. So all of your identity management systems that you have today that are connected to Azure, say you might have identity protection, and you have policies in place that say, hey, conditional access, if they're a high-risk user, reset their passwords and stuff like that. All of that stuff is still used within the universal print systems today. They only need an Azure Active Directory account. You do not have to have a hybrid system in place if you don't want to. So I want to make sure we preface and understand that. So I know some of our educational institutions have fully gone to the STS implementation where there is no on-prem AD anymore. And they have some newer updated paper cut printers. Just to make sure you understand, you are able to utilize Azure AD in its entirety. You do not have to have an on-prem AD environment for this to function. And then it allows you to set these two security options, restrict driver installation to administrators and the RPC authorization level privacy enabled to 1, which are oftentimes recommended as part of a lot of your high cybersecurity initiatives today. And so I know a lot of you have been struggling on the tech director side of, man, this print nightmare is causing me all sorts of cybersecurity hygiene issues. I'm supposed to be implementing these changes, but if I do, then my users can't install printers. And so this universal print system gives you the ability to finally lock that stuff down so that you're compliant in those areas. So as a quick discussion point, I just wanted to break down legacy printing and how it used to be in the past, because now we've kind of discussed how universal print works. We kind of, in some cases, need to understand where printing began. So printing used to be you had an on-prem print server, whether it was virtual or a dedicated bare metal server that was running that was running our print services on top of it. And typically how that would work is you'd have different printers across different endpoints at different sites that would connect back to that server, and you would add those printers and their drivers to that server. And then from there, in the Windows print systems, because it would be connected to your domain in Active Directory, you would then typically publish those printers to your Active Directory domain, and then configure your group policies to either force push out those printers when the user signed in, or to push out the different printers based on, like, if you wanted to make it available by location, or if you wanted to make it available for them to install themselves. And so the big problem with this was at the time, it was pretty revolutionary. It was great because you could centralize printing for the first time instead of having all these like random printers that would just be connected to a printer somewhere, and then you have to go over to that computer, drag the file over with either a flash drive or whatever method you used with your network attached storage, go over to that printer, print it, and wait a while, and then go back to your main work computer. This really kind of allowed us to centralize a lot of that back in the past. And so back in the day, this was a very, very great feature. It wasn't until, Print Nightmare that things began to become a problem. And so I'm sure, as you're all aware, and you've all seen, Print Nightmare is what made this a huge problem for a lot of our customers, because in the past, standard users could install printers. And as part of that workflow motion, they would install printer drivers on the machine. Well, hackers figured out a while ago that, hey, if we inject code into those drivers, the Windows system will automatically accept them and will override the admin permissions, because a standard user is allowed to install printer drivers. And so they had found out a very sneaky way to how to kind of backdoor malware into our print systems. And so to compensate for that, Microsoft patched a lot of this on the server side and made changes. But as a result, I'm sure a lot of you noticed that allowing people to install printers of their own became a lot more problematic because of those changes. Now, some of you overrode the systems and flipped it back and haven't really worried about like if Print Nightmare hit you, and others of you went down the extreme path of I got rid of all my old printers and I replaced everything with a new print system. We've all kind of dealt with this differently, but just to kind of understand, like, that's functionally why not functionally why, but universal print is a great benefit, because it removes a lot of those risks that a lot of us dealt with that situation in the past. And so it just makes it a lot nicer for us in the long term. Now, from here, I'm going to have Phil kind of go over the different kind of methods of how to register printers, how to utilize them, kind of the technical know-how, and kind of the nitty-gritty pieces of this. So that way you can see what this will kind of look like in your environment, and then that way you can better utilize it into the future. So Phil, if you don't mind, I will let you take it from here, and then just feel free to kind of kick me or ping me when you need me to move to the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Tyler. So a couple of things just to clarify regarding Mopria. That's actually been around for a little bit, but it's what Universal Print is reliant on, and is actually it's more of a consumer specification. It's what we call a driverless model, so that you don't have to have a print driver, or I should say, you don't have to have a OEM specific print driver. You can have just a Windows, for instance, has an IPP class driver, and we also have the Universal Print class driver. And those drivers can consume those attributes. So Windows will go out and ping the printer and go, oh, you're a printer, what can you do? And the printer will say, well, I can do all of these things. And then the IPP class driver can consume that and essentially allow you to print. And it gives you the, most of the options that are there. Some of the really fancy stuff like booklet printing and things like that are not available through the IPP specification yet. But because we're not downloading and installing a driver from anywhere, that's where we get the benefit off of what Print Nightmare was about, because Print Nightmare, the point and print model was you connect up to the printer, and if you didn't have a driver, we downloaded the driver from the server and we installed it. And that was the mechanism that was being exploited in a lot of the Print Nightmare stuff. So we had to shut it down and go, okay, you actually have to be an admin to install that driver, and that's where things got a little out of hand as far as from a IT management standpoint. The nice thing about Universal Print, and we'll get to that, is that we're using an inbox driver. And we're just consuming IPP attributes. So there's no transfer of files. There's no malicious files being downloaded to your system and installed with elevated rights. So that's one of the security benefits that we're dealing with Universal Print. And there's a couple other things that we'll go over here too. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to register a printer with Universal Print. And the best way to do it is if your printer has firmware that supports Universal Print natively. And what it does is it's going to go up and register itself as an Azure Active Directory device, and then be associated with Universal Print, and then Universal Print can manage that printer. If you have older printers in your environment that don't natively support Universal Print, that's where the Microsoft connector comes in, and you typically install that. You don't have to put it on a print server. You just have to put it on a system that has a local printer that points to that that print device. But typically, print server is the easiest way to do that because you already have all your printers installed already. And the connector, its job is to provide that communication between the local print spooler and Universal Print. So it handles the registration of the printers and pulling the print jobs, rendering them, and sending them off to the print queue in the spooler. And then we also have some third-party mentioned PaperCut and a few of the others, Equitrack. They have their own connector so that they can do a lot of their own stuff. The nice thing about the PaperCut connector is it supports Azure Active Directory usernames natively. So the Microsoft Universal Print connector, when we talk about secure print, trying to integrate that, we do have to have an Azure AD on-prem Active Directory hybrid situation set up with AD Connect. Next slide. So what's going to happen is usually on the firmware of your printer, you would there's usually an option for Universal Print. You put in your admin global admin account. Usually the first one has to be a global admin because there's usually an application, an Azure app that's going to be installed, which handles all of that, all of the Universal Print stuff on behalf of the printer up in Azure. So the first time you need to be a global admin typically to install that app, but subsequent printers, since the app is already installed, can typically be a print administrator or print technician roles. But at that point, your printer then gets registered with Azure and with Universal Print. And now it has an endpoint up in Azure. So it will go up over the internet and actually pull and retrieve the print jobs, because it's going to pull jobs down when it's notified by Universal Print. There's usually a notification channel that's set up, and Universal Print will ping the end of that notification channel, tell the printer that there's a job waiting. Then the printer will come up and pull the job down and go ahead and print it. Next slide. Now the Microsoft connector essentially handles all of that for printers that don't natively support Universal Print. So So what would happen is when you install, later on, we have a video of installing the connector, but you install the connector, you register the connector with Universal Print, and then you will get a list of here are all of the local printers that you can register with Universal Print. You select the printer, you click register, it then registers the printer with Universal Print, and it sets up a notification channel for each printer that you have. And then when a print job comes in and it hits that queue, the notification channel is pinged, the connector is notified, then the connector goes up and pulls down the print job and then calls the local print driver and actually renders the print job. The jobs come down typically from Windows clients is typically an XPS formatted job, but we also support PDF if you're using a Graph API or Business Central, which supports Universal Print directly. You can print directly from Business Central to Universal Print, and usually it's a PDF file that is sent, in which case then either the native printer would pull down that PDF and render it, which is part of the MOPREA specification, is that you support the PDF format, or the Microsoft connector would pull down the PDF and render it with the print driver. PaperCut supports PDF natively as well, so typically that's what's the format that's going to show up there. Next slide. Prerequisite for the connector is Windows Server 2016 or later with a particular, there are a couple of updates that are required for a couple of issues that we were having earlier. And then .NET 4.7.2 or later. Server 2019 has those particular fixes are in 2019, and there's some hot fixes for 2016 that need to be installed, but we have that documented as well. And then on your print server, or your connector is going to be running on a print server of some kind that is going to be on the same physical network with your printers, because it's still going to be using the TCP ports, because the connector just sends it to the print queue on the print server, and then that sends it out to the printer itself. Yeah, and so we have some videos of that. Next slide. Now, a third-party connector, they may have their own process, but essentially they do the same thing. You install the connector on a particular machine that has the local printers, or however they're going to do it. PaperCut has a follow me queue, in which case it does that. And then each connector has its own process for registering a printer, but essentially it does the same thing. It's going to register the printers with Universal Print, and then it handles retrieving those jobs from Universal Print and then sending them to the physical printer. Next slide. So the hybrid print scenarios, in some cases with the secure print, with some of them, the secure print or the follow me print is based on the user's on-prem Active Directory account being associated with the print job that's sent to the print queue. Since Universal Print uses Azure Active Directory and not the on-prem AD, those jobs typically would show up in the print queue associated with system, because that's the account that the connector is using. So we have this option when you enable hybrid support. What the connector is able to do is take the Azure AD account of the user and go out to a domain controller and get the on-prem Active Directory domain account, the domain SID or the domain user equivalent that's associated with that account, and then impersonate that user and send the job as that user. So we do have that for some of these secure print that are not universal print native at that point. One caveat is that the clients always have to use the universal print class driver. So if any of this secure or pin print or anything like that is dependent on the client side using the actual OEM driver, that will not work with universal print because we have to use the universal print class driver on the client. But if the job is strictly from a secure print standpoint is based on the user account that is sending the job to the print queue, then this impersonation is what we have enabled for those particular situations. Like I said, Equitrack and PaperCut, they have their own connector and they have their own way of managing that. So now we've registered a printer, then what do we do? Okay, well, in the portal, we would then share the printer. We give it a share name. And then we have access control where we can give it the Azure AD accounts that will be able to print to that printer. We do support Azure security groups, but we don't support M365 organizational groups or any of those kinds of things. So if you have email groups or something like that, those cannot be used for the access control list. It needs to be an Azure security group. So then you share the printer, and now it's available for all the users. We do have an option because the share endpoint is completely independent of the printer and the printer's endpoint that the connector would use on its end. If you need to change or service a printer or something like that, you can register the new printer and then do a swap printer and have the SharePoint now serviced by a different printer. And users don't have to reinstall a printer or anything like that. They just keep using the same shared printer. It's still the same from their end. It's just that Universal Print will now send any jobs coming in over that sharing endpoint to the new printer instead of the other one. And there are a few of the settings that you can set the defaults for. And note these are just the defaults. They're not forced. Users can always change them. It's just that whatever we're going to do with it is going to be the default at that point. Next slide. So here's an example of, we have a printer, we registered it. Note the printer ID. That's one of the things that from a troubleshooting standpoint, we use that a lot to track everything that's going on with that printer in Universal Print. You would create a share name, and then you have the access list. We also have an option there that just says you can give everybody access. So you don't have to add everybody. You can just flip that on, and then everyone has access. Next slide. If you want to edit the access control, it's under the printer shares menu for that particular printer. That's where you're going to find the access control and the share properties. Next. That's a video. I walk through that. That's me. And then we got another video. I walk through that. This is the swap printer that we talked about. When you click swap printer, the only printers that you will see in the list are ones that are not shared. So you wouldn't, if the printer's already shared as something else, it won't show up in here. So, but any printer that's registered but not shared will be in that list. Under the printer properties, we have the defaults. One of the big ones is the content type, which is going to be the default. You want it to be XPS for connectors and PDF for native printers typically. And that's just going to be the default for Windows client, what it's going to do as far as sending the jobs up. Other applications can also pull that content type. There may be others there. It all depends on what the printer registers with it. There's an IPP attribute that it's going to send up when it's registered that says what content types does it support and which one does it prefer. And so this is part of that. Regarding location, you can actually set the GPS location of a printer. And so if users have a laptop or are roaming and they have location enabled in Windows, we can actually correlate the two. And when you do an add printer, we can just give you printers that are within I believe it's a 5K and then a 10K radius of your location. So if you're in a building and you show up and you do add printer, it will just show you the ones that are in the neighborhood. We also have a hierarchy. When you do the select a search location, this is similar to the same kind of tree that we had with on-prem. When you set the location and then it gets published to Active Directory and you do search for printers, you get that same kind of location hierarchy of building, floor, room, that kind of thing. However you've managed to define that. We also have that there. A couple of things that are coming. We talked about the Azure AD support security groups. We also have a thing, delegated administration, which if you have a large area and you have print administrators for like each building or each logical area, you can configure it so that only the print admin only has the ability to administer the printers in their area. So if you're spread out over a wide area and you don't want a lot of print admins poking in on everybody else's printers, you can divvy that up. So we do have that option available. So, so we talked about that. Install printers on the client. You're going to click on Add Printer, and Windows 11 has an option that says if you're going to do work or school, that'll pop up if it detects if you have a work account enabled, configured on the system, and then we will do a discovery, and we'll provide you with the first 10 printers that we find typically. And then you can do a search and you can narrow that or narrow where you're going to look to try and find that printer. And there are a couple other things. We also have the MEM deployment. And we also have support for AVD and roaming profiles. So we go to the next slide. So this is a slide where we walk through installing the printer, what it's going to look like. And once again, these are going to be using the Universal Print class driver on Windows. So what happens when you click Add Printer? First thing we're going to do is check to see if you have a Universal Print license, and that's part of your M365. And then if we have that, then we do a discovery and we say, hey, how many printers does this user have access to? They're a member of the access group. Then we give you a list of printers. You select the printer and you go ahead and install. At that point, we get an IPP port, and it is installed as a local printer. On Windows 11, the printer is associated with the user's SID. So if you were to look in the actual registry under printers, you would see that there's it's the user SID : printer name is the name of it. And then that's connected to an IPP port, and that IPP port has the endpoint that the Azure endpoint, because that's what's going to send it up to Azure. And then once we have that, we pull down the attributes. We get a whole list of attributes of what that printer supports, and we build a pdc.xml file, which is in this particular directory. And in that file, if you were to open up, you would see all of the options in this print ticket format. So if there's an option that you're missing, you can take a look in that file and go, okay, did this option even get pulled down? And it may be that that option is not supported through IPP attributes. So consequently, it would not be available and it would not show up in the pdc.xml file. But at that point, then the printer is ready to use. Like I said, on Windows 10, the printers are installed as local printers. So unfortunately, all users who log into that would be able to see it, but may not be able to use it because they don't have the correct certificate and they may not have rights to it. With Windows 11, we started implementing the printers using the user SID, so they're specific to that particular user. This also allowed us to be able to start supporting roaming profiles. So we now have this using the DAS framework, the device association framework. We can store the information that's needed in the user's profile. So if they were to log back into a different machine because they have a roaming profile and they had never been on that machine before, the DAF framework would go ahead and reinstall that universal print printer for the user. So it effectively is following the user through all of that. And Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 11 multi-user session supports universal print and the roaming profiles. So if you're using something like FSLogix and AVD, you can now use universal print and it will follow the user. So the user just installs it once and then they get it. And then it will be there for any other sessions they log into. So what happens when we do the add printer discovery? We go ahead and we start with the GPS location and we see if there's anything there. And if there isn't, like I said, we do 5K, then we do 10K, then we just give a list of printers. And then if they want to do a search, they can do a search and pull up a tree and then search for printers based off of that. The options that we have are listed there, but we only use 6 of them. Floor and floor description, room name and room description, we use one or the other, but we don't use both. And we only go 6 deep. So there's some decision making as to which ones you want to use when you are implementing those particular location settings. The other thing you can do, you can search for not only the share name, but you can also look for make and model are also part of the search criteria that you can use. Next. Oh yeah, this is what I just
over this one.
Yep, I just went over that. Got ahead of myself. So Intune. So we now support the new MEM deployment, and this supports installing printers and pushing them out via Intune to workstations. We don't have removal of printers, however, yet. So you can't, you can disable the policy that's pushing the printers out, and we won't push the printer out anymore. But if the printer's already there, it will still be there. We don't yet have a remove this printer option, but that is in the works at this time. But you do need to have the July 2022 update on Windows 10 to support the new MEM deployment. Okay, so preferred content type, we talked about that a little bit. And then Business Central and third-party apps can send PDFs via the Graph APIs directly to Universal Print. So if you have custom apps or you know, if you're using Business Central, if you build a custom app using Business Central, it can support Universal Print natively straight from the app. So bring your own device. The nice thing about this is that because all the communication with Universal Print between the client and the printers is going through Azure and is going over HTTPS, is going over the internet. That means for on-prem printers, even if you have to use the connector, your users can be using a guest network that has access to the internet, but they don't have to be on the actual physical network that your infrastructure is running on. So you don't have to worry about allowing students, in this case, for instance, for them to be able to print, they would have to be able to connect to the network. Well, that's also where all your servers are. That's where everything else is. So now they have, you know, they're connected up, and you've got to do all kinds of security to prevent them from doing things. Because we're going through the internet, they can just have a guest network, which just gives them access to the internet, which gives them access to Azure. So their print jobs go up there, and then they're pulled down by the printer or the connector, which is actually on the physical network, and they go ahead and print. So you've got an extra layer of security there that, and you don't have to worry as much about that. So users, and if students have their own system, they just add their work account. Then it becomes a managed device through Intune, and then they have access to Universal Print and can go ahead and print. So this is kind of some of the deployment strategies we've talked about. The roaming profiles, access control, and like I said, with the other part about this is there's no need for a VPN between buildings, for instance. If you're in one building and you want to print to a printer on in another building, once again, you don't have to be on the physical network across everything, across the whole area. You don't have to use a WAN or anything like that. You're just going up to the internet, you're sending it to Azure, and then Azure is sending it down over the internet to the other place. So you've got a little less management going on there. Next slide. Demo. I think this is back to you, isn't it?
Yep, this is back to me.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Phil. I really appreciate that. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more at the last few slides. But yeah, so this part of the presentation, I just wanted to really show our users what this looked like. And so that we're going to show you what this will look like for a user that is using Universal Print and installing a printer for the first time. So as you can see, it's the same interface that we're used to. I'm going to come in here, refresh, see the cloud printer, add the device. It comes in and installs it locally on the machine. It shows that it's ready. We come in here, we can see that we've got a PDF document that we want to print. Come in here and it shows up in our normal drop-down menu as an available printer. Select that print job, and then we can select our other options. Remember what Phil was talking about earlier based on those IPP attributes that the printer has reported. And so it shows that this one supports color. So I want to print color. Come in here, switch that, and you can see that now it lights up on the right-hand side. It spools up that print job, prepares it to be set up to Azure. It gets up to Azure, it becomes available. The print connector on-prem, if you're doing that situation, will start pulling it down. So the biggest kind of reason about this, why this is very important, and kind of why one I wanted to showcase with this was that this is all completely secure over the internet connection. And to kind of help expand upon Phil's, like what he was saying before was, since this is all going through the internet and this is using your Azure AD account, a lot of the zero trust models that we abide by in our Intune and Autopilot devices today, it makes this situation look so much easier because now the communication is being taken from that local device, it's being piped up through Azure with your UPN, and then sent down to your on-prem print systems. And that's just a very nice experience overall because we don't have to worry about, man, I'm not sure if I've set this up right and then they try to print it. Is it secured? Is it set up the right way? Like our systems just make that so much easier to be able to implement that and make it available to your staff and students. And so I just really wanted to showcase that from a security perspective, Universal Print is really kind of taking that initiative to truly make sure that those print jobs and everything that you're taking care of in these environments is protected. Another piece from this, I also wanted to bring up really quick just to kind of showcase, like here's a nice kind of little slide that also showcases the fact that it meets GDPR and other local regulatory compliances. And so that's a huge piece too, as we're going into a lot of these compliances with insurance companies for a lot of our educational institutions. So you don't have to worry about this print solution not meeting a lot of those regulatory compliance laws and regulations. It's also important to understand that, like I said earlier, zero dependency on Active Directory on premises. You can use multi-factor authentication with Azure AD if you so choose. You can integrate the two together because remember, this is all powered by Azure AD in the back end. And then from here, you're issued an X509 certificate, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, but it's a certificate that's pushed out. And that pretty much states that this is a printer that you're validated to be able to print to. It's secured, and you don't have to question whether or not this is some rogue printer that's been installed on the devices.
Yeah, when you register a device with Azure, with Azure, and with Universal Print, you get a certificate. So there's going to be a local certificate, and that certificate is used to then get a user token, which we refresh all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's that user token which is used to then communicate with Universal Print. So yeah, so and those are all listed in the certificate manager under the I think it's the can't remember it off the top of my head, but yeah, in your store, certificate store, you'll see all of the certificates for the various printers and the connector.
Yeah. And so future enhancements, I just brought this slide to kind of show what we're looking for in terms of future support, more native integration with Microsoft first-party apps and services. And so it's really important to kind of understand, and Phil, I believe this feature is available today. With Universal Print and implementing it, you can print directly from like office.com, for example. Say you have a Word document that you're working on. If you've implemented the Universal Print systems, as long as you're logged into office.com and you're in our ecosystem and you can go to File and Print, the print system should show up as available and they can print to their on-prem print systems. So say, for example, they were on a Chromebook and they wanted to print a Word document, they could go to office.com on the Chromebook, sign in with their credentials and print. Correct, Phil?
I don't think we're there yet. I think you still have to have, I played with this a little bit. You still have to have the Universal Print printer installed on your local system.
Okay.
But what happens is Business Central and some of these others will pick up the fact that you have this printer, but then it sends it directly via Graph APIs. So it's going, it is most likely, I haven't actually looked at I think it's going from Business Central to Universal Print, but it's not coming from your Windows client. But you
Mhm.
have to have the printer installed on your
Mhm.
client for it to show up in Business Central. I'm not exactly how they're doing that, but
Mhm.
that's as I believe that's how that works. So
Mhm.
consequently, we don't support Mac and Chromebook and Android just yet.
Yep, but we're definitely working on adding these features into the future.
Yeah.
We're also looking at high availability and further integrations with Microsoft Endpoint Manager to just make that integration that much easier. Now, follow me printing and secure print, and let me think.
Oh, you
That,
want me to take that one?
yeah, if you don't mind, Phil, I believe we
Oh,
toggled back to you for this part.
yeah. Regarding the follow me configuration, this is where we talked about the hybrid configuration when using the Microsoft connector or using there are some gotchas with that. The Universal Print connector, the Microsoft connector, only processes one job at a time. So it's going to wait for the job to be completed before it pulls the next job. And if you have registered the follow me print queue, sometimes we're in a situation where user prints and then the job will sit there until the user goes and retrieves the job. But because the user hasn't retrieved the job, it hasn't show as completed yet. So the next job that's waiting for the connector is not getting processed and it's sort of hung there. So we have some guidance on how to work around that. That's if you're using the Microsoft Print connector. But typically with a lot of the follow me, they have their own connector and it handles a lot of that particular, all of those scenarios a little bit better than the Microsoft connector does. But the Microsoft connector is there and can be used for that. Oh, so this is part of this. So what we would do is we would use a non-managed print queue that forwards the print job to the managed print queue. So this would be on the print server that's got your secure print enabled. So the non-managed print queue is the one that we register with Universal Print. And that non-managed print queue is configured from a port to point to the managed print queue. So it might be just, whack whack server whack share of the managed print queue. And then what the connector then pulls down the print job, renders it, sends it to the non-managed print queue, which forwards it immediately to the managed print queue, and then reports back to the connector that the job is finished, is completed. So the connector will pull down the next job and just keep retrieving processing all those jobs. Whereas they would all just then show up and just sit in the managed print queue waiting for the user to retrieve the job, which is typically how it works when you're using just the on-prem print servers. So that's kind of the thought pattern behind that. If you're using the Microsoft connector along with a secure print solution of some kind. It does, but once again, it's usually reliant on the user's AD account. So we have to have that impersonation enabled, which means we have to have the AD Connect where you do the syncing between your on-prem domain and the Azure Active Directory. So you're using a directory synced account.
So yeah, we talked about this earlier about Business Central and OneDrive integration with Universal Print, how the print jobs are set as PDF documents in some cases. The native printer needs to support that PDF format, and then the connector will render that PDF file using the print driver. So this slide just kind of shows you like kind of the different integrations and one area that might be very useful for you in OneDrive in terms of printing things. Now, the next slides that we have are in terms of troubleshooting, and I'll let Phil kind of talk about these more in depth as well. But this is when we get to the stage of we've got the printer deployed, we've got it installed, and now we're trying to understand, hey, why isn't it working?
Right. So, the first thing that we usually do when we're troubleshooting is we want to see how far the job went from point A to point B. So typically, if the printer's installed and we click print, in the portal, in the properties of the printer, there's a jobs queue, and you can see all of the print jobs that are coming up. So the question is whether or not the print job is showing up in the portal. If it's not showing up in the portal, then we're going to be looking at the client and what's going on there. And then we're looking at, does the user still have access to this printer? Do they still have a license? Because sometimes what may happen is the printer's installed, but then all of a sudden they don't have access to it anymore because they were removed or something. So anyway, we have some tools and some tips on that. We have a page on the site about troubleshooting universal print where we have some basic steps to go through. If it's in that, oh yeah, okay, so here we are. I didn't realize I had different slides here. Okay, so if you back up.
Yeah, we broke it up so that way in case customers wanted to break it down based on the specific pieces.
Sure. So if you back up a slide. So, possible clauses, client doesn't have access to Azure, user no longer has a license, or the user no longer has access to the UP, or the UP printer is not shared anymore. Or there may have been a problem during the installation where we didn't get all of the proper IPP attributes downloaded. So we ended up kind of with a default, and it doesn't have all of the necessary attributes because the print job is built using all the attributes that are in the pdc.xml file. And Universal Print will look at that and validate that print ticket on the way up. And if it's not valid, we won't even send it to the jobs queue. So there's just some things to look at. Next slide. Some of the stuff we look at is we look at the application event log, a fiddler trace. We have steps on that, on how to gather that on the troubleshooting website, and also looking at the pdc.xml file just to see if it's valid. The fiddler trace will often tell us, if there are problems getting to the print.microsoft.com endpoints, if there's any problems there. So,
yeah, and the one thing I wanted to kind of showcase with this too, as I'm helping our customers with their proof of concepts and bringing some of these features online, it's really important that if we are having issues to record this information so we can get this submitted to Microsoft support, because it'll make it a lot easier for the analysis on their side. So it just overall will make it easier for us to help you with that support ticket.
So if the job is in a pending state, it means it's waiting to be picked up, in which case it's the responsibility of the printer or the connector to retrieve that print job. So at that point, we need to be looking at what's going on there. If it's a native printer, there's not a lot we can do from the Microsoft side, except for, is the printer on? It's not in a sleep state or anything like that, and it's getting a notification. Typically at this point, if the printer is not retrieving the job, then we would need to be talking to the OEM to see if they have some diagnostics on the printer that can see what's going on. If it's registered via the connector, we have a lot of logs that we would gather, and I think we do that in the next thing. But one of them is whether or not the connector is running, for instance. One of the issues is jobs may be in a pending state because there's one job in a processing state. And if there's a job in a processing state, then we're not going to go to the next job until that one is completed. So if it's stuck in a processing state, then we need to go and look at, if it's a native printer, we're going to go look at the printer, see if there's any errors there, that it's, tray open or, whatever, toner low, something like that. If it's with a connector, then we would be checking the print queue, gathering the connector logs, taking a look at the event logs for the connector service to see if there are any errors associated with that particular print job. And then also whether the actual printer is online. That would be in the spooler in the print queue. And then we're looking at the physical printer. So there's sort of tracing the whole path. With the following print queues, this is where, for instance, when we talked about the print job is in the queue, but it's paused and it's waiting for the user to come retrieve the job. That would be an example of the job sitting in a processing state in the portal until the user goes and retrieves the job. Then it would be completed, and then the next pending job would then be processed at that point. The other thing is size of the print job. It may just be, sometimes it's network latency, just causes things to take longer. Also, rendering large jobs may take a long time on the connector as well. Next slide. The print output's not correct. This is typically a lot of times, one of the things we're gonna recommend is making sure that it's got the latest print driver on the server. If you're using a connector, we have some options to enable some things on the connector logging so that we can take a look and see what that print ticket looks like. 'Cause sometimes the print ticket, there's issues with the print ticket, or the IPP attribute that we're using is doing something that the print driver doesn't understand, or there's a bunch of things that way. But that's typically something that a Microsoft support engineer can help with. And to gather the connector logs, this is the kind of thing that you would click on. If you have a particular printer, you click the collect printer diagnostics, and then an Explorer window pops up and you have a connector diagnostics.zip file, and then one for the actual printer. And then both of those would be provided up to Microsoft to help analyze the issue. Did I talk about the files on the next one? Oh yeah. In the connector diagnostics.zip file, you've got the event log. It's going to pull the event log. There's also the local printer registry key. These are some of the things that I look at, so I can see the device ID under the cloud data registry key, and then I can go up and then I know which printer I'm looking for. Because like I said before, all of the tools that I use to look at issues, customer issues in the service are based off of the printer ID. So from a PII standpoint, all we're looking at is a GUID at that point. And then in the print specific log, this is the local PCPT.xml. That's a list of all the attributes that the print driver provided to the connector. Now that's the list of all the attributes, whether they're supported by IPP specification or not. It's just, these are all my attributes. And then the service PDC is the one that the connector, after parsing through all of the options that the print drivers has taken ones, because sometimes, for instance, if it has a tray 1, lots of different print drivers define that tray 1 in a different way. There's like a specific string that it uses. but the connector and the universal print service know that all of these different naming conventions equal tray one. So what we send down to the universal print client is going to be tray one. So we're always going to send the same tray one down to universal print. Then when the job comes back up again, we will reverse that process because we know which print driver it is. And we'll go, oh, when it said tray one, we need to use this for that particular driver, and we'll convert it back. So in here, you can take a look at, okay, if you look at the service pdc.xml, that should be the same as the pdc.xml file that's on the client machine. So you can compare those two to make sure they're matched. That makes sure that your client didn't have a problem installing the printer. And then you can also, compare the options that are there and say, well, where's my saddle stitch? Why am I not getting saddle stitch? Well, it may be because the local PCPT defined it in a way that we didn't understand, so we didn't add it to the list. So these are the different things. This is where updating your print driver to the latest version, because sometimes the older print drivers define them differently, or we didn't understand them. And we worked a lot with a lot of the vendors on universal print in many aspects. And so one of them is just to, getting to the latest version of the print driver addresses a lot of issues that way. Next. So there is a utility called Postman, which can be used to actually look at the print job that's been sent, that the native printer is pulling down or is being sent from Business Central or something like that. Basically, it just gives you a way of looking at the print job that was sent to Universal Print. If you want to look at it to see, I had one case where they were complaining about collation. Collation was not working, but they were printing from Business Central, and I used this particular tool to look at the PDF file that was being sent from Business Central to Universal Print. And it turns out it was being sent rather than as a 2-page job with copies equals 2 and collate being true. It was actually sent as a 4-page job already collated and with copies equals 1, and they wanted it uncollated. But there was nothing we were going to be able to do because it was already collated by the Business Central app. But without looking at the actual PDF of what was actually sent from Business Central, there was no way to really know that. So at that point, it was going back to Business Central and saying, or going back to the customer to have them talk to the person who developed their Business Central app for them. Here's what they need to do regarding how they're generating the print job. So that's the kind of thing that you can do with this tool as well. Next slide.
Actually, Phil, that is
all
the
of it?
content for
That's
today.
all the slides. Woo!
Yeah, that's all the slides. We got through it. Awesome. Well, yes, so I know this is a longer presentation, but I really wanted to do a deep dive for all of us with Universal Print, because I know a lot of us are kind of dealing with this concept as we're going to like Intune and Autopilot and cloud managed devices. So this slide has additional resources available to you if you'd find any of these useful, like the universal print pieces. We've actually got a little universal print simulation on the bottom left-hand corner that you can use. Just kind of test it out and see what happens. We've also got access to the YouTube channel where this will be posted later tonight. And then, yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for participating. There will be a survey attached at the end of the PowerPoint that will be in the description of the YouTube video. So if you please wouldn't mind filling that out for future presentations, we would really appreciate it. But yeah, that's everything. So thank you so much, Phil, and thank you so much, team, and we really appreciate it.
Yep.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.